Elena Parker had never meant to come this far west, and certainly not to a ranch that stretched beyond the horizon like a sea of gold and dust. The stagecoach had rattled away behind her, leaving nothing but the whisper of wind and the long shadow of her own foolishness. She hadn't known she was part of a cruel joke until she arrived at the Broken Spur Ranch, clutching a letter written by the girls from the saloon back east who had dared her to respond to a "help wanted" ad. They'd laughed, saying no one like her could last a day among real cowboys. But pride and heartbreak had driven her here anyway, a city girl wearing borrowed boots and a hopeful smile. When the ranch gate creaked open and a tall, silent man in a weathered hat stepped forward, she almost turned back. His eyes were the color of dusk, quiet, unreadable, patient in a way that made her heart trip. The other hands nearby exchanged smirks, already knowing the joke. She was supposed to fail, to run crying back east. But she didn't. She squared her shoulders and asked, "You still need help?" The cowboy nodded once, wordless. His name, she later learned, was Luke Calder, a man who spoke as rarely as rain fell in these parts. They said he'd lost his brother to the range, lost his laughter with him, and hadn't spoken a full sentence in years. Yet when Elena stumbled trying to unload the grain sack from the wagon, it was Luke's hands, rough, sure, and surprisingly gentle, that steadied her. The others chuckled, calling her City Blossom, but Luke only looked at her once, long enough for her to feel both seen and stripped bare. That night, after the sun bled itself dry over the plains and the wind howled like an old memory, Elena sat outside the bunkhouse shivering. She'd been given a cot barely big enough for her knees and a blanket that smelled of dust. The laughter of the men drifted from the barn, cruel and careless. Then came footsteps, measured, heavy, familiar. Luke stopped beside her without a word. The stars threw silver over his shoulders, outlining him like a ghost carved from quiet strength. He shrugged off his worn brown coat, thick with the scent of leather and smoke, and laid it over her trembling frame. "You'll freeze," he murmured, 3 words, deep and low, his voice cracked from disuse. It wasn't pity. It was something else, something that reached right into her chest and warmed her from the inside. "Thank you," she whispered, but he was already walking away, swallowed by the night. That coat became her shield, her courage, her proof that maybe the joke wasn't on her after all. Days turned into weeks, and the ranch slowly became both torment and teacher. Elena learned the rhythm of the land, the stubbornness of the cattle, the way dawn painted everything new, how silence between two people could speak louder than gossip ever could. Luke watched her, never interfering but never letting her fall too far either. When her hands blistered, he left salve by the water trough. When she got cornered by the wild bull named Justice, his rope sang through the air before she could scream. And each night, when the others drifted toward the saloon in town, she'd find herself sitting by the corral, feeling him near. They rarely spoke, but something wordless passed between them, an understanding built on dust, sweat, and the quiet company of survival. Then one evening, a letter arrived, tattered, scented faintly of perfume. One of the ranch hands had brought it laughing, saying, "Guess your fancy friends remember you, sweetheart." The words inside cut deeper than any thorn. "Hope you're enjoying your little adventure, Lena. The cowboys must love the show." She burned the letter that night, tears streaking her soot-covered face. When Luke found her sitting beside the ashes, she finally broke. "They sent me here as a joke," she confessed, voice trembling. "They thought I'd run home crying. Maybe they were right." Luke crouched beside her, eyes reflecting firelight. "You're still here," he said simply, his hand brushing a tear from her cheek. "That's what matters." It was the most he'd said since she'd arrived, and it undid her completely. From that night forward, something shifted between them, quietly, like a river changing its course in the dark. Spring came late that year, but when it did, it painted the plains in wildflowers and forgiveness. Elena rode out with Luke each morning, learning how to read the sky, how to move with the land instead of against it. One afternoon, thunder rolled across the hills, and rain came down in sheets. They took shelter under an outcropping of rock, close enough that she could hear the steady beat of his heart under his damp shirt. "You ever think about leaving?" she asked softly, rainwater dripping from her lashes. "Used to," he said. "But the land keeps me. Don't let go easy." His eyes met hers then, clear, direct, unguarded, and the world seemed to stop breathing. She wanted to ask if he was talking about the land or about her, but she didn't. Not yet. When they rode back to the ranch at dusk, soaked and laughing for the first time in months, the others stared in disbelief. The silent cowboy had smiled. That night, as the storm died and stars re-emerged, Luke found her again outside the bunkhouse. He didn't say a word, just draped that same coat over her shoulders, though it was she who wasn't cold this time. It was a promise, silent but certain, the kind only hearts fluent in pain could make. And as she looked at him, at the man who had once been nothing but stillness and solitude, she realized that maybe she hadn't been sent here as a joke. Maybe fate had a sense of humor bigger than anyone understood. But far off, beyond the fence line, a figure watched, someone from her past, someone who knew the truth behind that cruel letter and had come to make sure Elena paid the price for daring to stay. And though she didn't know it yet, the joke that had started her journey was about to turn into a fight for everything she'd come to love, including the silent cowboy who had taught her how to listen to the language of the heart. The following morning broke quiet, too quiet. The usual chorus of the ranch, the clank of buckets, the lowing of cattle, the laughter of men beginning the day, was muted, swallowed by a tension that hung thick as summer heat. Elena sensed it before she understood it. Luke was already saddled when she stepped outside, the sky a bruised shade of dawn. His hat shadowed his eyes, but she could tell something was wrong. "Storm coming?" she asked, though the air was still. "Maybe," he murmured. It wasn't the weather he was talking about. By midday, she found out why. A rider came from town, bringing dust, bad news, and an echo of the past she thought she'd burned away. The man's name was Clayton Reed. Smooth voice, sharp smile, and eyes that once made her feel wanted before she'd learned what mockery looked like behind them. He dismounted slow, gaze sweeping the yard until it found her. "Well, if it isn't little Lena Parker," he drawled, tipping his hat. "Didn't think you'd actually stay in this cowhole." The ranch hands exchanged looks, curiosity buzzing like flies. Elena froze, pulse thundering. Clayton chuckled. "Guess the joke went further than we thought, boys. She was supposed to last what? A week." He turned toward Luke, smirking. "You must be the mute she wrote about. The one who doesn't talk." Luke's jaw clenched, muscles coiled under his shirt. He said nothing, but his silence felt like a warning. Elena stepped forward, voice steadier than her hands. "You should go, Clayton." "Oh. I'll go," he said, "but not before I get what's mine." He held up a folded piece of paper, the deed to her small inheritance, forged and stolen long before she'd fled the city. "I came to collect," he sneered. "You think a saloon prank washes away debt?" The men whispered among themselves. It was cruel theater, and she was trapped in the center. Before she could answer, Luke moved. He didn't raise his voice, didn't even speak. He just stepped between them, slow as a gathering storm. Clayton laughed. "You gonna stare me to death, cowboy?" Luke's hand drifted to the rope at his hip, not to draw, just to remind Clayton of what kind of man he was dealing with. The air snapped taut. Finally, Luke said 4 words, low and even, "You're done here, friend." Clayton's smirk faltered. He spat at the dirt, swung into his saddle, and left with a promise tossed over his shoulder. "This ain't over." But the wind swallowed his words before they could stick. For a week, nothing happened. The ranch breathed again, the men returning to laughter, and Elena to her rhythm of chores and quiet evenings. Yet beneath every calm moment ran an undercurrent of waiting. Luke knew trouble didn't ride away that easy. He started keeping watch by the corral at night, a shadow among shadows. Elena tried to tell him to rest, but he'd only shake his head. "Storm's not done," he'd say. And when she finally reached out, laying her hand on his arm, she felt how tightly he was wound, like a man ready to lose something he hadn't realized he needed until it was almost gone. One night, the storm broke for real. Not thunder this time, gunfire. It came from the ridge, sharp and echoing. The horses screamed in their stalls. Elena ran out just in time to see torchlight flaring at the edge of the fields. The barn was burning. "Luke," she cried. He was already there, driving the cattle out, shouting orders she didn't know he had in him. The other men scrambled, half-dressed, half awake. The flames climbed fast, greedily licking through hay and timber. Amid the chaos, she saw him, Clayton, his face twisted, his hand clutching a pistol. "You should have stayed gone, Lena," he yelled over the roar. "You embarrassed me. Now you'll watch it all burn." She froze, terror clawing up her spine. Then Luke's voice, rough and commanding, broke through, "Get to the well." It was the first time she'd heard him shout. She obeyed, hauling buckets, throwing water until her arms screamed. And then she saw Clayton raise his gun, aimed at Luke's back. Something inside her snapped. Before she knew what she was doing, she ran. The shot cracked, echoing across the valley. Luke staggered, the bucket fell from her hands, and the world went silent except for the crackle of fire. Clayton smiled, just for a second, before Luke straightened, blood seeping through his sleeve but his eyes burning with fury. He moved like a wild thing then, tackling Clayton into the dirt. The gun went off again, once, twice, and then there was only smoke and stillness. When it was over, Luke was on his knees, chest heaving, the pistol in the dirt beside him. Clayton lay still, his hatred finally quiet. The barn was half gone, the night sky glowing red. Elena ran to Luke, tears cutting through soot. "You're hurt," she gasped. He shook his head. "Not bad." But his face was pale, his arm bleeding freely. She tore a strip from her dress, pressing it against the wound, hands trembling. "You saved me," she whispered. "You saved everything." He looked at her then, really looked, as if words were no longer enough. "Wasn't saving," he said quietly. "Just couldn't watch you burn." That was Luke Calder. Simple, honest, heartbreakingly sincere. She laughed through her tears, and in that ruined night, under the ghostly light of dying embers, he kissed her. It wasn't the desperate kiss of survival but the steady, certain one of a man who'd finally found home after years of wandering inside his own silence. Weeks passed. The barn was rebuilt, the cattle returned, and the land healed as the two of them did. The joke that had sent her west had become the story of her life, the one she'd tell her children someday when they asked how love found her among dust and danger. Luke spoke more now, though still sparingly, each word weighed and true. One evening, as the sun melted behind the hills, he took her to the spot where wildflowers grew by the fence line. "You staying?" he asked. She smiled. "You'd miss me if I didn't." He nodded. "More than I'd breathe." She reached up, brushed his cheek, and said softly, "Then I'm staying." The wind carried their laughter across the open fields, mixing with the sound of horses and distant thunder. Somewhere, the ghosts of the past finally laid down the burden. Years later, people still talked about the woman who'd been sent to the ranch as a joke, and how the silent cowboy who put his coat on her shoulders turned that cruel laughter into something holy. Some said they'd seen her wearing that same coat, patched and faded, teaching young ranch hands how to ride. Others swore Luke still barely spoke, because he didn't need to, because everything worth saying was already written in how he looked at her. And if you felt the warmth of their story, the fire that turned pain into love, the silence that became home, remember this: every heart has its ranch, its test, its storm. Don't let the laughter of others decide your worth. Like Elena, stand tall in the dust, hold your ground, and let love find you when the world least expects it. Brown heart if you believe in stories that heal, in love that rises from ashes, and in the power of quiet hearts that refuse to give up. Subscribe now. More tales like this wait on the horizon, where cowboys still whisper truth under starry skies and where every ending is just the start of another ride.